Great. Well, welcome back to round two. My name is Julie Sandorf. I'm the president of the Charles H. Revson Foundation, and I am really thrilled that you've all joined us today, and thank you very much. People ask me all the time, what is this obsession with the libraries? Why are you crazed on the libraries? And for the, I don't know how many decades I've spent in the fields of housing and community development, I realized that I miss this unbelievably critical element of what makes communities healthy, vibrant, lively, and full of all of the things we want for ourselves, for our families, for our neighbors, and for our children. And that is Andrew Carnegie's genius of the civic square, of the place that, as he said, outranks any other thing a community can do to benefit its people. It is a never-failing spring in the desert. We are going through right now a time where not only do we feel like work is disrupted and the globe is disrupted, but we are going through a disruption in knowledge gathering, in community building, in the way we live our lives since the creation of the printed word. And the libraries are right smack in the middle of it. And I feel that we are incredibly fortunate in this city because we have 3 library systems that are being run by 3 remarkable people. Tony Marks at the New York Public, Linda Johnson at the Brooklyn Public, and Tom Galante at the Queens Public. And in the 5 or so years that I have been knee-deep in all this library stuff, I have seen a coming together between these 3 library presidents who have said, you know what, we're in this for the health of the city as a whole. And some examples of that have been working together in creating great efficiencies and back office stuff that you guys never see, but both creates efficiencies and saves money, which they can put back into programs. They have together looked at how they can improve the kind of programming they do, which system does better programming in certain areas and which don't, and how they can learn from each other. This is a total sea change, folks. And I think most importantly, in looking at how they have, despite serious budget cuts over the past 5 years, have not only increased and improved their services, but have had circulation skyrocket. This doesn't mean that there can't be room for lots of innovation and change. There can. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at how we make our 3 library systems the best in the world in the most creative ways. But I think we've got a pretty good start with these 3. And before I walk off and have Jonathan ask the hard questions, I came across a great quote last night. And the quote was, "Cutting library budgets during a recession is like cutting hospitals during a plague." And I hope that we all have enough good sense to know that the libraries have been, in so many quiet ways, our human capital resource in New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And I know sitting in your seats during the last panel, I'm sure there was a couple of chances you wanted to jump in. And so there's a lot that I want to ask. And the purpose of this panel, at least partly, is to follow up and to hear your thoughts and feedback after the ideas and suggestions that came up in the first panel. But let me give you a chance with a very easy question. That is, at the outset I talked about the really serious skills challenges facing this city. In so many ways, New York really has this challenge going forward to bring up the skills of New Yorkers, to address disconnected youth, to make sure more people learn English, and a lot of other things. Could you take a brief minute, each of you, to tell us what are libraries already doing? I mean, we kind of put this title up here, Opportunity Institutions, and there's clearly a thought that libraries are already part of the human capital answer or solution to the city. Can you tell us a little bit how libraries already are helping to address the skills gap and the human capital challenges facing New York? I think we could start with Tom.
In Queens, we have incubators, I would say, in a number of places that do just that. Whether it be for children in our various programs that we offer after school for them to help with their schoolwork, whether it be our teen rooms and our teen programs. Like in Far Rockaway, we have a teen library that does a lot of work with disconnected youth. For workforce development, we've had Workforce One prior to this current push in the last few years. I think it goes back probably at least 10 years. We've had Workforce One centers in our libraries. So I could take the thing that really caught me with the first panel was we do a lot of the things already that I think are needed to help move the city forward to meet the policy agendas of the administration or the council or the public in general, but it's not at the scale that it should be. There should be Workforce One centers in 30 places in Queens out of our, half of our libraries anyways. And the other point I thought might be worth sharing right now as a start, because maybe this will generate more dialogue as we go, I think there's more money than possible to go around to make that happen if we don't silo the services that are being offered to New Yorkers between government and government agencies, whether it's a state level, city level, or federal level, and the libraries, where we look at it all together. And that was the point from the gentleman in the back, where we have these access points to deliver these services that are underutilized, where we should be looked more as a partner of government in their policy decisions.
Thanks, Tom. Glenda?
So I'll build on what Tom has already said. In addition to the programs that we are doing for children, we're also offering ESOL courses, pre-GED classes. We're very much aware of what's happening in the GED world and those exams going online, and what we need to do to prepare now our patrons to take that test. Not only involves the test, but actually learning how to take an online exam. And so English is second foreign language material that we have for the immigrant community, so that at the same time that they're learning English, they're also not feeling isolated. And so there's no end to the amount of work that we're doing to build human capital in the city of New York. And I think that Tom's point is well taken, and as an example of a way that we're just beginning to be more efficient about the way resources are used would be the program or the pilot with the Department of Education. So it used to be that the Department of Education was spending money on libraries in every school to meet a state mandate. We are now through a new search engine and a pilot program working to get the resources of the 3 city library systems into the school libraries in the public schools. So instead of having access to maybe 20,000 books, which would be a good school library, children who are going online to look for material are now finding that they have access to 17 million items. So this is an enormous step up. It will take a while to roll the program out, but it's a good example of how the city is thinking about leveraging resources instead of having them purchased in silos.
So first I want to say thank you again to Julie and colleagues at the Revson Foundation. I should have done that earlier. And it's great to be here with my colleagues. As you've heard, we are increasingly figuring out how we can work together, because that makes perfect sense. So let me just reinforce one of the things that Linda just talked about, and then tell you a little bit more about NYPL on this front. So the model that we all grew up in the public schools is 10,000 typically out-of-date books and a card catalog. And that's if you're lucky enough to have a library that's open in your school. which sadly is not the case in all schools, shocking enough. It's a model that makes absolutely no sense in the 21st century. You cannot meet the information needs of kids who are used to having instant access to the world of information in that way. And this new model that Linda described, which is a three-system partnership with the largest school system in the country, which allows every teacher and student to order from our 17 million combined circulating collection, and we physically deliver, one day we'll virtually deliver, to the schools. That means we know from a pilot that we did last year at NYPL that kids read at least 3 times as many books. We know that this is going to make all the difference for the Common Core working, so that if you've got a report to do on the Louisiana Purchase, you can actually pre-order, your teacher can pre-order the best books, and we'll move it around the city as people need. And it means, in terms of the future of the library, it means we'll have 1.1 million school kids using the public libraries every day, and be able to build from that. And you know, it only took us 100 years to figure out that we needed to lower the bureaucratic walls between three systems and the school district. Why it took 100 years, I'm not quite sure. Technology certainly helps. But it's an example of the kind of creative cooperation. I want to shout out to Jeff Roth and Ann Corriston, my colleagues there, who have played such a leading role in this. As for the New York Public Library Beyond and the issues that were raised, we've decided to focus on 3 programmatic areas in terms of education in our branches. And we really are very self-conscious about moving from a passive 19th century model of come, take what you want and go, which is great, we want that to continue, to really being the education program provider cradle to grave in New York. So 3 quick examples. We are currently the leading non-city provider of English as second language instruction, but we send away tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people a year, because there just aren't other providers in this space. In the last 6 months, we've doubled our English language instruction in our branches, and we aim to go 10-fold increase. We are the leading free provider in New York of basic computer skills. Again, similar, often same immigrant population. We know these are essential skills to move in this economy. We turn away tens of thousands of people. We have doubled in the last 6 months, and we aim to go 5- or 6-fold increase. We just bought $12 million more of computers to make this possible. And then lastly, at New York Public Library, we're a little behind our colleagues in this front. Every day, 30,000 kids come into our branches because it's safe, and that's great. And we sort of do nothing with them, and they do what my kids do unsupervised, which is a little bit of homework and a lot of computer games. There is absolutely no reason why, and we are now building this up, we aim to partner with the best providers in this city, in the country, to be innovative and to create the most exciting and potentially the largest after-school program in America. Because we got the kids, and we have the facilities, we have the trust, and God knows the city needs us to help in this way. It will boost achievement, but it will also be exciting and bring the kids in based on innovation and technology and what do they want to do.
Thank you. You know, Tony, you mentioned 30,000 kids come into branches every day, or
it's probably 60,000 or something between the 3 systems, I imagine.
It also made me think of the response that Commissioner Fatima Sharma had to Brad Lander's question, and that, you know, in the importance of being nonprofits, that's what attracts people. And I think that one of the reasons why SBS and the workforce centers have so successfully partnered with libraries, this is where the people are. And there's a real opportunity to do more of these services. And so I say that to get to Tom's original point of scale. And so this is where people are coming. But to see the numbers, frankly, of how few people you're able to serve with ESOL or GED prep programs was very stunning to me. And we talked to a lot of librarians and advocates around the city to see what a fraction of the demand for things like ESOL that you're able to do. And I'm just curious, why is that? I mean, obviously it comes down to funding, but are you not seen as the human capital providers we're all talking about today? Do people not get that connection? Obviously Workforce One centers want to partner with you, but why is it that the scale is still fairly small in some of these things you're doing?
I think there's a number of elements to that. One is government and funders kind of catching up with what we're already doing. And I think events like this create a great opportunity for that. I think libraries have innovated forward in non-traditional ways to be that community place and that service provider in areas that all touch upon education, but it's not about book. It's about people teaching people. Today we learn in lots of different ways than when Andrew Carnegie founded us. But it's still the same mission. So for adult literacy, ESOL, family literacy, health literacy, financial literacy, I could go on and on. We have programs that cover every one of those areas. But take ESOL. We have 3,000 people in Queens that we teach ESOL every year. They graduate from our classes. It's done in about half of our libraries. The demand is a third of the borough needs these services. What is that, 600,000 people? Okay, so we're not seen as a provider of that. Now, in order to get there, right, one is you need the physical capacity and spaces to offer these programs. So one of the things that we're doing right now, with the help of our borough president, who's been as big as anyone could ever be behind this, we're expanding out our footprint of our facilities with about a $300 million investment that's going into all of our libraries, whether it's new libraries or expansions. Because you need classroom space to do this. It's not something you can do virtually, okay? So that's one key element. Our ESOL program and our adult literacy in general, it's about a $4 million program for Queens, of which city funding is about $1.3 million of that. All the rest of that is funded through state, federal, private grants. Another point relating to our overall programming, which was highlighted here as being rather extensive, the city government doesn't pay for any of that, at least in Queens. The way we operate, the hours of service, which we're all terrible at, compared to any reasonable average, compared to, say, Hoboken or what have you, right? Anybody from Hoboken, I'm sorry, I don't mean it that way. But, we should be at least 60 hours a week, We should be at Columbus at 72 hours a week and not 40 to 45. And right now, we're all fighting a proposed budget cut that would take us from an average of like 42 or 43 hours a week down to 21. It should be a different dialogue going on right now, and there's so much time and effort spent on this budget dance that we all deal with. But back to the ESOL and adult literacy, there are ways we're working with someone right now on a private end to build out software so that we can actually use classrooms and have people go off with tutorials electronically while they're on the train, subway, what have you, then come back into a classroom setting. So there's ways we can use technology too, so it doesn't all have to be in a classroom, but you need the spaces. And our 6,000 people a year has been our physical capacity for 20 years in Queens. We don't advertise this program to a single person, and we have a lottery that we do electronically now, because back in the day that we did it where you had to stand in line, which was at least 10 years ago, we stopped that. People would camp out all night at our central library. It went 4 or 5 blocks around the building. And then we'd have fights and all kinds of things that broke out with people trying to learn English as a reason to fight for that, right? So what we need to do is find a way, how do we fight for them? How do we get the funding in place and the spaces in place so we could take really award-winning programs but reach all the people that need to be reached? And all too often when government, or city government in particular, puts together its programs to deal with this, they silo it into city agencies instead of looking at us as a partner. And I would be happy and pleased to go up against any government program, and I could probably do it for 30% less than they're going to deliver it for, at least be able to compete for those funds.
So I can't resist talking about...
You're going to hold me to that too, Tony.
We've been together too long.
Only been a couple years now, right?
I can't resist talking about real estate and our mission and how those two things come together. So Tom mentioned that the mission hasn't changed, and that's largely true. Carnegie's mission is brilliant, and the idea that all you need is the inclination to enter our front door to be able to have access to the world's information and knowledge is as important today as ever and as true today as ever about what we're doing. It's just that people are accessing information differently, and so our business model has become infinitely more complicated. So it was just come in, get something in print, go off and read it by yourself or take it home. And now we are talking about what platform you're most comfortable with, how people can learn collaboratively. So we don't really have spaces in our footprint that allow people to work in groups, although our information commons is a first step toward that, but we need to be doing it throughout the borough, throughout the city. And then the different languages. So Brooklyn is a community of immigrants, apparently 130 languages spoken in Brooklyn. We're doing our best to serve people in 30 different languages. And it makes our business much, much more labor intensive and, as I said earlier, more complicated. So what do we do about that? And we've got a footprint that's essentially over 100 years old, and was built at a time when people used libraries in a way that's much different than they do today. And then we've got a public that is very much attached to the sentimental notion of what a library is. I've been involved in libraries for a long time, and when I started talking about this like 10 years ago, this woman came up to me, a board member actually, and said, oh, it's not your father's library anymore. And she was so crestfallen. I'm thinking, right, it's not your father's library anymore, and this is a great thing. But if we had more space, as Tom said, we could provide more classes. We could provide more access to technology. Right now, we offer public access computers to the full extent that we can. It's not a matter of actually acquiring the hardware. It's a matter of where to put it. Tablets will certainly make that easier, but for the moment, it's still an issue. And we have elected officials who are representing constituents who are actually still sad about the fact that it's not your father's library. So it's challenging, but I think it's up to all of us, and Lord knows Tony and I are black and blue from the fight, but we really need to be thinking about how to get library services to the places where people need them in buildings that are hospitable to the kinds of services that we want to offer that are actually attractive. We're spending money right now on things like HVAC systems and roofs that just get us sort of back to zero, that don't build spaces that are, so we were talking in the earlier panel about needing to have teen rooms. We're desperate to do more work with teens, but we need to build spaces that they want to actually spend time in. And so all of these things are forcing us to look at how to use our resources more efficiently and how to actually leverage the value of some of the real estate that we have in ways that can be spread throughout the borough, not just in the particular community where that asset might lie.
Tony, I want you to answer basically the same question, but let me just, again, try to ask you if you might help us understand why is it? Every year we talk about the budget dance, and it does seem like, as you all have been saying, you are helping the city address some of these fundamental problems that the city's got to face in the years ahead. You're already doing it. You're doing it at a fairly small scale. And we talked a little bit on the earlier panel about why that is, and part of it may be advocacy. I'm curious, what's your thought? Why do we have this problem, and what can you do about it?
I have a PhD in political science, so I suppose I should understand this problem better than I do. It turns out my PhD is not worth very much for actually understanding how politics works, at least in New York. Let me try. First, if you haven't been to a branch library in a neighborhood, go. I mean, as the previous panel said, every seat is filled. It's the only place in a city where we're so divided economically, racially, geographically, where everyone comes together, and they come together to read and to write and to think. I mean, at a moment when we sort of think nobody's doing that anymore in the 21st century. It couldn't be more inspiring. So, which only reinforces your question, Jonathan. I'll tell you what I think the constraint is. I think it's pretty simple. It's money, because money buys staff, right? So every seat is filled in our libraries, but we have community rooms, classrooms, wonderful occasional programs. Again, we're a bit behind Brooklyn and Queens in this regard, where we should be using those facilities every minute that we're open for educational program. And the reason why, whether that's English second language, computer skills, after school, whatever it is, right? And it'll be different in different neighborhoods, obviously, in different times of day. The real constraint is we just don't have the staff, right? I mean, if you think about it, we take a 20% cut in staffing and discretionary city funding over 5 years. We haven't closed branches. We haven't reduced our hours. Huge efficiencies, really amazingly so. But we don't have the staff to, these programs require professionals. And so I think that's the real constraint. I think, why is that? I guess I would say two things that occur to me. So I'll give you one example, a la the black and blue bruises that Linda was talking about. So the Mid-Manhattan Library across the street from here is the most used branch library in America. 1.5 million visits a year plus. It was sort of crappy when I was using it in high school, which is amazing because it was almost new, but somehow we managed that. It's even more aesthetically challenged, and now it's mechanically failing. So it actually is at the point where, if we wanted to do something, which we do, one option would be to close it for 3 years and fix it, which I'm unwilling to do because that will strand 1.5 million people, who come from all over the city to use this largest of circulating libraries and collections. And one of the things I've been struck by during this 1.5 years is I've never once gotten a message from a Mid-Manhattan user saying, this is outrageous, fix it, right? I got lots of other messages. Lots. And, is that our fault for not figuring out, and in part it is, how to galvanize those folks to say, no, you need to speak for what you need? Is it something more fundamental about American politics? Probably, some combination of those. And then the other side of the coin is, of course, people think, the New York Public Library, the Queens Public Library, the Brooklyn Public Library must be fully city supported. We live in a city where the business community, we just heard this, has real interest in the future of educational achievement and how it connects to skills, etc. We see people investing in charter schools and in all kinds of innovations. And somehow the library hasn't connected to that. We haven't been able to say, actually, we're here doing this work, and we can do even more of it with more help in a public-private partnership. And what would that look like? I think, sorry, I've gone on too long, except to say, my view of these things always is a bit not purposefully naive. We should just do more and prove that we can do more. And that will put us hopefully in a better position to convince people to fund us, both the city and private funders in whatever combination makes sense.
The last decade or so, there's been a pretty substantial increase in education funding in this city. And I guess with our report and the numbers that we're seeing with people using programs at the libraries, that in many ways libraries are, part of the city's educational infrastructure, but we've seen the opposite in terms of funding. And do people not get that libraries are part of the educational infrastructure?
I'll touch on it in two ways. People tend to view educational as institutionalized education, when the world is evolving to lifelong learning and non-traditional learning, right? So government tends to, wants to beef up its educational system. There's a lot of work going on with the public school systems, with colleges and so forth. But what happens when you reach the age of 21? You got another 50 years of learning anyways, right? So we need to change our mindset, and I think government and policy folks, are focusing on what they control directly, which is the institutionalized educational system. Getting to the budget dance and that, I think I've been around 27 years dealing with this budget dance stuff. And I think it all comes down to a couple things, really, in the end. If you look at the big picture, how you change it. Library service has become so valuable to New Yorkers that the city government uses it as a way to control spending. Now, I talk to and work with lots of commissioners, or say the chancellor, who's a great guy, who loves his library, used our central library when he was a kid. I mean, I work with so many elected officials and leaders in the current administration that really, on an individual basis, get it on what we do and what we're all about. But somehow, that does not permeate into the institution of the city of New York and how it approaches its service delivery, even though they individually, I believe, get it. I think a part of that is the fact that for 26 out of the last 27 years I've been around, cutting libraries has been one of the first things that comes out when it comes to the executive budget that's adopted or put out there, no matter what mayor it's been, because they view us as so critical to services that is so close to the city council because they understand their communities. It's a way to control city council spending. In the end, we all get shortchanged. Libraries, the people, the city, you name it. What we need to do is find a way that the mayor's side can control spending, as they should, to have a balanced budget without hurting institutions that are the closest to what people need. And I just think it needs some creative thinking or a creative way that budgets are looked at or how they're decided between the council and the mayor. And I mean any mayor. I can go back, the only year that the executive side proposed an increase in library funding was Rudy Giuliani's re-election year. That was the only year. So I don't think it's unique to this. Now, I think with what's gone on in the economy in the last 5 years has taken this exact same process for 27 years and exasperated it. Because what happens is funding is put in the budget to plug, people view it like we have a proposed cut and then we get it all back. That ain't so. We're down 17 million, Linda's down 17, Tony's down probably 30 or something. We've all taken huge cuts in funding. I'm down 250 employees right now already, with another 500 threatened. The council, though, does a yeoman's job to try and put back huge chunks of it. But when you're up against $105 million in budget cut now, July 1, if the council puts back $95 million that they can find, and they have $300 million to work with, supposedly, is the concept usually, we're still all going to be cutting our workforce more and delivering less service. So getting to what the lady in red here had said earlier about how do you look at things differently, right? How do you look at things differently, right? The way to look at it differently is not to say, I'm not looking to grow the pie. I'm not a tax kind of guy, But I got to tell you, if things are looked at differently and how services are delivered, we deliver services to seniors after school, all the things we do, I'm sure there are ways, given that we're private, and I do believe more efficient than government, just by our nature, that there are ways to say we could deliver so much bang for the buck for the people in the city without growing, any kind of budget pie. It's just a redistribution of how that happens in an effective way.
That, except for the thing about the lady in red. No, but I just want to say one thing, and it came up earlier in the panel this morning about the notion that we're caught in this gray area between being nonprofit and being government agency. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that there are reasons that actually make that model work for us. But I think that unfortunately right now, and probably since the recession began, we've sort of got the worst of both worlds instead of the best of both worlds, and it would be nice to be able to change that. There is a problem with perception that people think that libraries are funded completely with tax dollars, and therefore they don't need private philanthropy, and it's our job to disabuse them of that fact. It's really about the great work we can do. So if the public money supports sort of the vanilla services, then private money can allow us to do the more innovative things and also to sort of test new things, which is important, that we have the opportunity to make some mistakes and to figure out what works best for our communities. So I'm happy being in the gray area. I just wish we had the best of both worlds, and I think the best example that I can give you is this. Since 2008, we have not hired a librarian with city funding. So all the librarians that we've hired since 2008 have been affiliated with a particular program that was funded with private dollars. What that means is we have an aging workforce, and so we also have many jobs that are vacant right now in order to meet the budget cuts that Tom explained. But we need to be hiring people who have recently come out of programs that offer masters in library science. But library science today, of course, means, and I'm sure many of you know this as well as we do, means computer literacy and the ability to teach digital literacy to our patrons, which is really what we need to be doing now as we talk about expanded definitions of literacy.
So it really is the, I'm a relatively new person of the three of us. It's a sort of unbelievable, sort of perfect storm disaster in terms of the budget issues, right? So on the one hand, we seem to be grouped, at least according to the city budget outcomes, with the cultural institutions, which means we get cut more than education does, even though, while we are in some ways like a museum, we are much more like an educational institution. And want to be even more, need to be even more of that. And yet, my colleagues depend on city funding 85%. New York Public about 50%. So we don't have the private resources that the major cultural institutions do, but we get cut as if we did because we're in that category, which means we can't do what the city needs. And while we are enormously grateful for the restorations that we get, particularly with the efforts of City Council, I find myself in this world where I'm supposed to say thank you for an annual 4 or 5% cut, which over 20 years, over 5 years is a 20% cut. It's just it's sort of bizarre. It just feels like something's not connecting. So let me be very explicit. It seems to me it's time, and we are talking about this, to say, let's imagine a new deal, right? Andrew Carnegie did this with the city and with the libraries 100 years ago. What would a new deal look like? How can we commit, the three systems, to more educational programs that the city needs and its citizens need, to more hours, if we can, to raising more private funds, hopefully with your help, in return for a much more sensible sort of take us to the budget that we had in 2008 or its equivalent and just baseline us at that so that we don't have to have the uncertainty twice a year, if not more. It just seems to me, again, I'm not asking for money for nothing. It seems to me we should be ready to commit to what we would do more for the city. But we should be capable of that kind of adult conversation and dealing because the library is so essential. And I think we are approaching the moment where we can have that kind of conversation. At least I hope so, because this is wacky at this point.
Let me just give you a small sort of peek into what the budget dance looks like. Last year, the budget has to come out by June 30. Last year, we were told that what was delaying it was that the City Council was trying to deal with after-school learning. And when they finished with out-of-school learning, then they'd get to the libraries. So we were like...
let me change the topic just briefly, and that is, I think we all agree, and if you read our report, one of the recommendations is a kind of a case for more public sector funding. But what about the philanthropic community? I'm curious. This may be a tougher one for you all to answer, but you know, we've heard from a lot of people in the research of our report that the support hasn't been there. Clearly, there's a number of amazing funders, many in this room, that fund libraries, and I want to say that, but I think on the whole, people suggested to us in our research that there could be more. And I guess I want to also frame that in the context of, you know, libraries are working with immigrant communities, the elderly, disconnected youth. A lot of the issues that the philanthropic community, or many people in the philanthropic community, are very concerned with. And is there also a disconnect, just like with government maybe not getting it? Does there need to be a certain level of communication or more support from the philanthropic community?
Yeah, I'll touch on, keep the same flow, I guess. Two areas with that. One is we could do a better job for sure, and that's something that we're working on our end for sure. But I also think that we have reimagined and moved forward with libraries in ways that the philanthropic community hasn't totally caught up with, where there is a brand issue of looking at us as an institution that is just about books, okay? So I think where we've made really strong inroads into that community is by us, you know, doing partnerships. We've done a lot of partnerships with museums, with areas that you would not expect us to be a part of. You know, Hive is working at our Far Rockaway Library in the teen center there, doing lots of great programming. So partnerships are something that we've had a huge effort into over the years, whether it be, let's say, for example, on, you know, because we're that community place, people see us as an access point then, right? So we got a $5 million grant that was coupled with the American Cancer Society, along with Memorial Sloan Kettering and Queens Health Network. And 20 of our libraries became access points for people to get screenings as well as medical information on how to access medical care. And what came out of that were people that were in the latest stages of cancer that were detected, people that learned about how to take care of themselves better, how to eat better, all the basics that we would naturally assume for most people. But those 20 libraries that were selected were libraries that had high incidence of cancer in the immigrant communities that didn't know how to access our healthcare system in any way, who then cost a lot more money to society if not caught earlier on, right? So there's lots of examples there where I think the network that we have becomes this great tool for others to connect into us. And then two other points that are kind of related. I believe libraries are kind of in a pinch right now. And what I mean by that is in a good way. I mean, it's a great position to be in. This is not a negative in any way. The whole digitization of content creates tremendous opportunity for our society and for libraries to help fill that void, whether it be for helping people, you know, so that we don't have content controlled by 6 publishers, at least 80% of it. You know, there is so much opportunity out there for e-publishing that libraries in every community could be taking self-published works and helping drive that to masses, right? So, but at the same time, we're going through 20% budget cuts. We need print and we need digital. One is not really replacing the other. People use them in different forms. The same people might use print or they might use digital depending on the content. So when you're in a 20% budget cut, when you should be expanding the money going into digital content and print content, guess what? Something's got to go. So for us, that's been us not moving into the digital arena as we should, okay? We should be bridging that digital divide. That is a big growing divide. It's not just access to internet now. It's people being able to access things on mobile devices, and there's content only coming out in electronic form now that unless you have a device, you can't get to it, right? The other thing I wanted to point out is that we've had to make a choice in Queens that is not a choice we should have to make, which is, are we going to be a community place or a place that has information on the shelves because of these budget cuts? And it was kind of like a come to Jesus moment for us like 3 years ago as we got nailed in the middle of the budget year with a $4.5 million cut on top of a mid-year cut. It was, okay, here's the choice. Do I lay off 110 people and reduce hours dramatically or not buy any books for 6 months? What would you guys do? Think about it. Put yourself in that situation, right? The come to Jesus moment was, you know what, we're going to keep our people, keep our hours, all the programs we deliver, the access to computers, and all the other things we do, and not buy a book. But we shouldn't be put in that situation. So when I say there's a pinch, you know, we view, oh, it's 20% cuts, people have all taken a hit. Yeah, sure, but just think of, like for us, the amount of content that isn't out there for people that they're either buying, and it's costing society a lot more through that process, or just not having that knowledge. So I just think it's short-sighted, but that's the pinches are digital and print. You got to make a choice there. So neither one of them are where they should be. But then really a real divide going on between we need to be this community place. That is where the future is for libraries. It's not about just loaning books. And we shouldn't have to be making a choice that we could be just this one or the other, because we'll never be good at either one of them. There needs to be that drive of funding that helps support the digital and the print, as well as the community place and the circulation place.
Linda and Tony, I mean, if there was one ask or more for the philanthropic community what you'd love to see doing, is there something that you think that they could play a role in?
Well, I mean, there's so many places that we could. So I think the foundation world understands, you know, what the dilemmas are and how they can be helpful, and they're looking actually for ways that they can innovate with us, which I think is extremely helpful. I think for Brooklyn, and I'm sure it's different for Manhattan, I always say the East River is wide. I think that for private individuals who are looking to make contributions, the library is a tougher sell these days, in part because of this notion that they're supported with tax dollars. But also, you mentioned about the people that use us as resources, the immigrant population, not necessarily the population that can afford to make year-end contributions or even have that in their, you know, thinking. And so we're not a museum where we have, you know, sort of fun and luxurious galas or openings that, you know, you can support and then go and attend. So it's less about funding the arts and more about funding really, you know, real Ilya Meisner work. And it's an education process, and I think, you know, we're also gearing up to do a better job. We've sort of been remiss, I think, over the past years in doing that. We've got a great new team that's working on it, but I think that part of it is sort of making people understand that that supporting your local library is a really worthwhile thing to do, because it not only because it is so democratic an institution, and it is a place for, you know, children of whatever socioeconomic background to come and learn. And the fact that we are as diverse as we are makes it that much more interesting place for people to be.
All right. Tony, I know you probably want to get in there too, but we're kind of running out of time, and I want to get to a few other questions, so if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you, we heard a lot.
Since you're good on the private side.
I'm sure someone's going to ask a question, so you'll have another opportunity, but we heard a lot in the first panel about technology, and kind of maybe I'll combine this with a question of something else we heard, and that was about just making sure that libraries are a place that don't necessarily replicate the schools, but teach in different ways. Teach in ways that maybe teens or other folks don't want to be in a school environment. And so I'm just curious, I mean, to what extent are you doing that? And is there more that the library should be doing in that area?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I told you I'd give you a chance.
All right, so very quickly. Last year, the New York Public Library had the largest year of private fundraising in its history, almost $100 million. If I do my job, if we do our job right, we will double that this year. I'm now going on the record. I'm going to get myself in trouble.
Yep.
It is very hard to raise private money when donors think that the city's just going to take the money out the other side, right? That doesn't make any sense for anybody, right? Hence the baseline question. And as the question you didn't want me to answer, I would say if you all can help us reach out, for instance, to the investment community, the hedge fund community, folks who've been investing in educational innovations in this town and haven't thought that the library could play, you know, we need to demonstrate that we are playing and we are right there on the front line. That includes being innovative in the use of technology, and when we talk about massive expansions of English second language or computer skills training, obviously, or after school or extended day, whatever word you want to use, we're talking to everyone from the MIT Media Lab to, you know, folks in Silicon Valley to, I mean, whoever, to think about how to be creative about that. And I do think there may also be funders who will come from the information technology world, but we need to convince them that we are not a sort of, you know, a 19th century institution that's going to go out of business with the digital, with digital information. So let me be very clear. Again, we've been working together on this. We are certainly combined, we're the largest library in America, if not the world, and we are in New York, which is the headquarters of the publishing industry. And so let me just be very clear. We face a future, or certainly I believe that we face a future in which the big six publishers were not going to give us books digitally to lend. And that if people wanted to read digitally, which is increasingly the case, that what we've been able to do for 100 years, which is ensure the bottom third or quarter of this economy of this city would be able to have books that they can't otherwise afford, that was going to go away under a technology that should actually make access more readily available. So again, as an example of what the library can do, we have been in negotiations with those big six publishers, and we believe it is our social responsibility to ensure that people will be able to read books digitally who can't afford them, and that the publishers need to make deals with us. And let's just say, stay tuned very shortly. We've been working very hard on this. So again, that will demonstrate to a whole new sector, including a potential funding sector, that not only is the library not sort of, you know, dying or asleep, but actually that we can get things done that Google couldn't get done, right? And, you know, so this dynamic is at play, and technology is clearly an essential part of it.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And the publishing industry, it's not that they wouldn't give us digital material. They wouldn't sell us. Yeah. Digital material.
You know, one of the challenges clearly facing libraries that we document in the report is that as well as the libraries are doing in attracting people, and you know, some of the branches just, you know, numbers off the charts, clearly there are a handful of these high needs neighborhoods where you would think that people would just be eating up the libraries, that the usage is actually fairly low, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm just curious, how do you address some of those things?
I'll throw in just a quick one on that. I'll just talk borough-wide for Queens. When you're buying 66% less content to go on your shelves because of budget cuts, to be able to keep your hours and all the other services, right? Our circulation, we grew from 60...
But it's growing. People are using some branches.
Not here right now. And we've grown from 16 million to 23 million. This is after your data somewhat, through like 2011. We're now back down to 18 million. If you don't have fresh content, people aren't going to borrow it as much. It's amazing that I'm still loaning 18 million items, given how old some of this stuff is, when you think about it that way. So
what about programs? Because one of the
programs
panelists also
are expanding because programs are funded not by city money. So our programs continue to grow. We're going to probably, I think it's fair to say, no matter what the heck the city does, unless we have all of our hours cut in half with the budget proposal, you know, I could see us doubling our programming in the next 3 years. Because through private funding sources, state grants, federal grants, there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to grow that program plays. Because people are seeing that as a great opportunity for us. But if we don't have the hours, well, you got to have the doors open before you can deliver all those extended programs with other people with non-city money.
But I think your point about underused or libraries with less usage in areas where you might anticipate seeing a greater activity has something to do with not being in the right place. And that gets back to the whole infrastructure issue, but also doing more outreach. I mean, one of the things that we've learned is that outreach and going to where people are and making them understand what we've got available is really critical to doing a good job, whether it's through the Department of Education program. I mean, the difference between having people out there and actually making the case for us, almost like salesmen, is really critical to making sure that we get the services that we need to deliver into the hands of people who need them. And also that but I think this location issue is important. If you've got a library in a challenged neighborhood, in a place that is scary to visit, people aren't going to go there.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me follow up on the general infrastructure question, and this will be my last question, and we can have questions from the audience next. But a couple people talked about infrastructure and maybe rethinking infrastructure at the libraries in the previous session. One thought is that, people mentioned, can you open after hours for certain people, maybe have more partnerships with community-based organizations in the way that you're not now, maybe even as a way to bring in revenue. Secondly, as the way that branches are changing, and at the very outset, Linda, you talked a little bit about, space is so important if you're going to get people into programs. When you go around libraries today, sometimes you see the shelves. There's not a lot of people walking around the shelves looking for books, but all of the tables, every single seat is actually occupied. Is there a thought about reconfiguring some of those branches? How do you do that? So I'm going to put all of these infrastructure issues as a kind of opportunity question on the table for you all.
I'll jump in on that. I think there's a number of elements to what was said by some of the questions before. I think having a hub, regional, large library with all those, call it, extra resources and classrooms concept makes sense. Our Flushing library, 76,000 square feet, is 10 times the size of our typical branch library, has 20 times the volume of a typical library. We have nearly 3 million people a year who walk in that door, about 8,000 every single day, okay? So it's huge. I also think, then we have, say, our Broad Channel Library, which is 2,500 square feet, and meets the needs of that community, really, in the way that is. So I think that, call it large regional hubs, like we're building one in Elmhurst right now. Steeles, we're going to have a topping off ceremony sometime in the next few months, 30,000 square feet there. Now, if we had the capital to be able to make that Flushing size, I think it could challenge Flushing's volume given the immigrant community there. Because the immigrant community, I have to say, tends to drive volumes more than folks who are not immigrants, okay? At least that's what we see with our actual demographer, our patterns that we look at. So I think the regional approach to infrastructure makes sense, not building a 76,000 square foot library in every community. We have a base model in Queens that we view as an 18,000 square foot base so that you have a space for people to get together and to create that mixing chamber, per se, of all the different things that we need to be. And I would say that probably holds in 40 to 50 of our communities. And there's a few that will be smaller. We need to be in places for circulation of general books and just transactional things in subways, in airports, all kinds of places, right, that we've already got modeled out that we would love to do. But we're just doing our best to try and keep the libraries we have open 5 days a week. So we're not able to look at all these other opportunities that require ongoing funding. And I want to point out to the philanthropic community, that funding is so important for us to take and innovate and create programs and new directions and partnerships. But I can't deliver a quality program unless I know the funding's there year after year after year after year. And that's where government has to step up for that. Like our after-school program. We used to have, we'd get 10,000 here, 10,000 here, it was about $10,000 to run one in each library. We had a hodgepodge, because every funder had different requirements. Every funder had different priorities, okay? Now, we then took and got a Wallace grant, about 7 or 8 years ago now, took a look at the whole thing and said, you know what? Here's the program model. We took the best of all the different programs we had, built out what we called our BOOST program, for Best Out of School Time program. And then I said, you know what? I'm making that a basic service at Queens Library for kids. No more private fund. We're going to work on private funding. If it comes in, great. It'll help resupplant the money I just stole from our circulation services. But it became something that was needed for a core service, not an add-on that would be different in every community depending on what a foundation or a donor was willing to provide. So we really need to look at these services like that and say, what should be that core service? What should be, if you're going to have an after-school program for kids in each community, you need infrastructure. You know, that's not virtual, folks, right? So there's a lot of things if you think about what we do. Now, the last thing I'll say, because I'm going on too long on this, in the digital arena, opportunity is created that our infrastructure will have less books on our shelves as time goes by, right? What an opportunity that will create. Now, we'll always have print books. I do believe that, and there'll be large quantities of it. But that creates opportunity, too, for us to move more and more into the program space, to that place where you don't have to have your whole first floor filled up with stacks of shelves. So some after-school program or youth organization could come in at 8 p.m. when we closed and host programming there for kids. So I think the multi-use concept has lots of opportunity for it. And we're moving towards that because as we've reconfigured our spaces, we've done 40 libraries over in the last like 7 or 8 years. We're doing that. There are less stacks. There are more open spaces. We're taking the old staff room, and the community room used to be smaller than the staff room, swapping those around so that the community room is the largest room we have now. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the infrastructure play, but to deliver that program.
So we've been looking hard at collaborations and trying to figure out how to enliven not only the programming but also the level of activity in some libraries. And Brooklyn has an extraordinarily robust creative community, and we're trying to figure out how we can be more supportive of the artists that are working. Obviously, the writers are a high priority, but there are other performing and visual artists that need support as well. Despite what everybody thinks, just because you moved to Brooklyn doesn't mean you've already got your book deal. And so we're doing a partnership, for example, with Spaceworks, which is taking spaces in libraries that are perhaps not particularly well used and converting them to spaces for studios that artists who don't have their own can use on a reserved basis, and thereby providing a real resource for a community that we think if we support will also make us stronger and gain more support from the community. We also have a program that is teaching painting, for example, to senior citizens and using local artists to do the work. So you're creating a job opportunity for an artist who needs work. At the same time, you're providing a program to a group that's a high priority for us and who really reaps a lot of benefits from the socialization that goes on with coming out to the program and also learning a new skill. It's fun. And so the more we can do creatively to support the communities, every great library should be reflecting the community that it serves. And with 60 branches, we're serving a whole lot of, a ton of different communities, and the artistic community is an important one for us. But I think it's more importantly for this discussion an example of how to take libraries that either we can't fully staff because of their size or are in locations that are challenging to keep thriving and finding people who really need the spaces and want to use them in a productive way.
So we believe in books. That said, you don't need to go to the branch. Go to the Rosemary Reading Room after the program and just take a walk around. You'll see every seat is filled. Almost everyone has a computer in front of them. Probably a third of them are computers that we've lent them. And a very small percentage of people have our books in front of them, right? They are not coming to the reading room. And this is, lots of these are high-end research folks for our collection in the way that they used to, right? They're finding other ways. But they're coming because they want to be together, right? And I think there is a lesson there. Again, we need to have the collection of books available, and we're committed to that. But that is a reality at this point. The second point I'll make is when the New York Public built the Bronx Library Center as a hub, it's a fantastic building. One of the things we found is that it's chock-a-block, right? It's a beautiful facility, great collections. It's just completely packed, right? It's open 7 days a week. So I'm going to go out on a limb, and I've got colleagues here who are going to tell me whether I shouldn't have said this, but just from eyeballing going around with the 87 branches, I would say that if there are branches that are less well used in terms of butts and seats, they tend to be the yuckier ones. People are attracted to beautiful facilities and where they feel not insulted but actually inspired. So if I could think of branches where I've seen not every seat filled, my instinct is that they tend to be the ones that we haven't gotten to renovate yet. Now, mind you, we have $270 million of renovation going on right now. Leave aside the Central Library Plan that you may have read something about, which is, of course, mostly to renovate the Mid-Manhattan. That's the largest expenditure there, so branch library. But I'm going to ask my colleagues to check this, but my instinct is there's a correlation here between whether it's been renovated and beautiful and how many folks you actually have coming into it.
Yep.
I can think of only one or two branches that are not very nice and are not as full as the others.
Well, our report had a lot of data about the correlation between branches that were recently renovated or recently built and spikes in attendance and usage there. So it's clear you're onto something. Questions from the audience? Right in the middle.
My name's Elizabeth Cook. I have more experience advocating for parks and culturals, but some with libraries. I'll make this a question. We're entering a mayoral campaign cycle. Have the three groups worked together where, going into this, I'd love to see that every organization that endorses somebody for mayor, whether it's a newspaper or Citizens Union or any municipal art society, any group around the city, and secondly, every place where there's a forum on New York One or any place there's a debate, the three groups agree together on three questions that every single candidate has to answer publicly. Like, would you commit to an 08 baseline of city funding for 4 years? And that way we could turn to the private foundation world and jointly ask for private money that would match that for certain programs we all agree on. Something so that the broader public can quickly understand where you are and publicly and at least confront the mayoral candidates on where they stand.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, we're all over that. I think all three of us are working towards that everything that you just said.
So, are you?
One of the things that's happening right now is we're trying to figure out our coordinated message. What is the deal that we think we need to be pressing for? And we're starting to have some conversations with the candidates, and we'll get increasingly vigorous about that.
Right.
And of course, again, we recognize that we have to cooperate, not undercut each other in order for this to work, and that we can do more as a set of three systems, even though that may be different in each one of our systems, right? Meaning, one of us may need to increase hours more, one of us may need to increase education programs more, but the result should be more of all of it citywide, right? And that's exactly the discussions we're in.
It's a great point. Good question.
We also, by the way, see the Cuff report and these kinds of forums as also part of
Great
that
opportunities
process. And it's not a coincidence that this is happening now as we move into an electoral season.
Yes.
Mary Schwartz from Library Journal. Sandra had brought up on the first panel this idea of transitioning kids from sort of passive recipients of services to partnering with the library as they get older.
Yeah.
There's two things that I thought might be good opportunities for that, and I wanted to see if you guys could comment on that and maybe suggest others. There's outreach into communities that are not as familiar with library services. Seems like it would be one opportunity. And then the crowdsourcing projects that I know NYPL at least has been working on seems like another. So could you guys talk
So
about that?
I'll jump in. It occurred to me when that point came up earlier. We have a program called T4, which is a program where children, high school students come in the summer. They're selected, and they take classes all summer about technology. And then during the school year, we actually pay them to be resources in the various branches to help with technology. We have another similar one that's not so focused on technology, but the same kind of opportunity to offer internships for kids during the school year in hopes that they sort of catch the bug that we've already caught, love libraries, and therefore want to make a career of it. But it's really important because they've got responsibility. It's like the perfect program, right? Because they are not only doing a service for the library, but they're also learning the responsibilities that go along with holding a job and having responsibility. And I think that this is the kind of work that we need to be doing more of. But it's very powerful.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Another dilemma, a different one that hasn't really been raised before, is the move in the philanthropic community and also in government toward outcome-based funding. So
I was going to mention that a minute ago.
More and more philanthropies are wanting to see results. But libraries aren't institutional quite in the same way that K-12 schools are. You don't have files on all the people that you have in your programs. Seems like it could be a problem. Are you doing anything about that? And first of all, and second of all, if we move more toward outcome-based budgeting and funding, is that a big threat to you?
That was something I was thinking of mentioning earlier, because in Queens, we are moving more and more towards collecting data about our customers and the actual outcomes. But I got to tell you, it goes against the grain of the values and what libraries are all about, which is anonymity and one person being able to come in and learn at your own pace and without us knowing your name or even have a library card. So that principle that's been around for as far as our organization has been around, that anonymity is what generates people to walk in our doors because they can learn about anything they want without anybody looking over their shoulder and knowing who they are. That's one of our biggest weaknesses in getting private funding, which has to be outcome-based so they can best allocate their funding. So we're doing that more and more now, and I've got metrics and meetings, in fact, people in this room that are spending all kinds of time on how do we collect data in the most, without having to collect personal information and share that. I guess is the best way to put it for outcomes.
I would say the same for Brooklyn, that we, when I got here about 2 years ago, it occurred to me that the only metric that we were really looking hard at was circulation. And that if we continued to use that as a measure of our success, that pretty soon, regardless of how successful we actually are, we'd be proving that we weren't. And so we started to look at ways that we can still aggregate information, not giving a specific example of how we're being successful, but rather looking at the number of people that we reach and the outcomes that people have as groups in terms of English as a second language or how many pass the GED, that kind of thing. But we are still 30,000 feet up. I think that for a lot of reasons, eventually we'll have to come down a bit. I think it goes to the private philanthropy issue as well. How do you get, we have almost 1 million cardholders right now, and that's a good solid list. There's a lot of information that we should be using that doesn't necessarily get too personal, but about who those people are and how we can reach them, not only to provide service, but also maybe to raise money.
So assessment is an interesting issue. I was a college president before this. Let's just say U.S. News and World Report has its problems as well. So take the circulation metric. It occurs to me that if we said that's the metric of success of the library, then we should spend every dollar we have buying every copy of Danielle Steele that we can get our hands on.
50 Shades of Grey.
Right? Our circulation will go through the roof, right? That's silly, right? That's just not what we should be doing. So we need to think about what assessment is. I mean, as I mentioned, physical visits, electronic visits, circulation, use of computers, use of computer classes, educational programs. All those are metrics, right? And we're way up on all of those across the three systems over the last 4 or 5 years. So, I think there's value there. Interestingly, when I've had conversations with donors that are in the sort of charter school or education innovation space, and I say, what do you think assessments are? And some of these are very, people who are very, interested in assessments. Trying to keep my language polite here. They say, we're not sure that the library needs to demonstrate or could demonstrate that, our after-school program by itself has boosted, the reading level by the following 3 grades. That's going to be hard, even though you'd think that's what they would say. I mean, their view is, if you can create, the view they're telling me so far is, if you can create really interesting, innovative programs after school that bring kids in consistently, right, we know enough to know that's going to have a major impact, and we'll have assessment of impact even if we can't put our finger just yet on exactly which one. And I confess I like having some flexibility there, and I certainly prefer that to what I would describe as stupid forms of assessment, which as an educator I've certainly seen happen.
Well, the whole issue of output versus outcomes is, circulate, say, 23 million items, right? What's a great output? We all know, geez, people must have read and learned a lot there, right? What was the outcome of that? So we do that now on a program basis, right? But if a foundation were to say to me, okay, I gave you X amount of books and I got loaned X number of times, what was the outcome of that? We need to be tracking those people and seeing where they went with their lives to really give them the outcomes that you might find in an educational, like a school, to be able to track it there, let's say, which gets to the root of what we're all about, which is not to track where you went. So we're doing a lot of work on that now, and it's something where we need to go more there, but privacy is important. And we all are giving up our privacy so much day to day, every day, with Facebook and all the different things we do, that, even my kids are like, I don't really care about confidentiality. Everybody can know everything all about them. But, privacy is still important to some people. And the reason we connect to so many immigrants is because of that value we have on privacy. So when I have them walking in the door and I have them filling out forms, name this, 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 and this, so I can then track outcomes, I'm pushing people away, really, at the same time. I'm trying to take care of a foundation that's going to want metrics of outcomes, not just outputs, but outcomes, right? So that's what we're up against from that end,
It's a challenge. Well, we're really out of time, and I think I've learned so much. I appreciate all your thoughtfulness. Before everybody gets up, Councilman Jimmy Van Bramer was going to be doing the closing remarks here today, and he's very ill this morning, and so he's unable to come. He's obviously the chair of the Libraries and Cultural Committee. He sends his regrets. And I also just, I guess, to sum up for him, I want to go back to, what we heard today and what was in our report. We know what libraries are doing. We know that they are on the front lines of solving a lot of the big challenges New York is facing. So many more people are going to them. As we say in the report, more people are using libraries for. The question is, how can the libraries get more of the support they need to do what they're doing in a greater scale, as mentioned earlier. And I'd like to go back to how I kind of framed it at the beginning. New York City has these critical human capital challenges. I think that, frankly, to answer Elizabeth's question, I think that we've got to really convince the mayoral candidates and others running for office that the city does face this human capital challenge going forward. Too many disconnected youth, too many immigrants that don't speak English very well, too many people that aren't really ready to access community college, as Kathy Wild mentioned earlier, or to be prepared to succeed in today's knowledge economy. And more than any other institution, I think, libraries are so well positioned to really address those gaps and help the city address them. So I think that to answer your question, I think part of what we need to do is get that across more than we are, and I think the libraries are trying to do it. I think there's more of a communication message, but I really think that today's discussion was helpful in at least getting there. I want to thank Julie Sandorf and the Revson Foundation for making this support happen. Really, she has been kind of a one-person dynamo and really bringing to light all that libraries are doing, and her support has been really amazing. Also thank Tony and NYPL for letting us be here today, and to all of you for just your thoughtfulness on this question. So thank you.
It's a pleasure for us to have someone other than the three of us actually making these points. It's great, truly. And when we were in City Council the other day, more than one councilman in his prepared remarks was quoting the report. So you guys have been a real assist to us, and thank you very much for your hard work and allowing us to participate in it.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.